can now bring in our environment editor, Valérie Dekimpe. Valérie, great to see you. Now, scientists have described the current state of the world's poles and glaciers as extremely alarming. What's the research telling us?
Well, Antarctic sea ice is receding at an unprecedented rate, Delano. You mentioned the poles warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. Well, in Antarctica, in the last 50 years, temperatures have risen by 4 degrees Celsius, with obvious consequences for ice shelves. And it's a phenomenon that's already been well documented by scientists. Essentially, the loss of snow and ice means less incoming sunlight is reflected back into space, essentially exacerbating warming, and we're having this kind of vicious circle of more warming. According to scientists, areas of the world which are meant to be permanently frozen, ice caps, glaciers, sea ice cover 10% of the world's surface, and changes in what scientists call the cryosphere, those areas permanently frozen, are happening a lot faster than it was initially predicted, again, fueled by global warming. And just to give you a recent example, Delano, Greenland's last remaining ice shelves have lost a third of their volume in the last 4 decades, and there's now, as a result, a major risk of rising sea levels. And there's an important distinction to make when we talk about ice melting. And those ice shelves essentially are massive chunks of ice floating over the surface of the ocean. And when the fact that they're melting is not necessarily adding to this issue of rising sea levels, on the other hand, they act as dams protecting glaciers on land and slowing the loss of ice. And so essentially, when you have those massive ice shelves weakening, that in turn can lead to those glaciers letting more water and ice into the ocean. And so according to the latest research, that could lead to rising sea levels of more than 2 meters.
So you painted a pretty good picture of what this means for the environment, but how does this impact our lives?
Right, and that's what's really crucial, Delano, is that whatever happens in polar regions can potentially have huge consequences for people living in low-lying islands like the Marshall Islands. Whatever happens in glaciers in higher altitudes can have major consequences for people living down below. So all of the changes that I described before could actually have an impact on people's livelihoods, more than 2 billion people on Earth. And so more than 2 billion people, depend on glaciers for drinking water to water their crops. And so as glaciers melt, more water will become available, but eventually those supplies of water will dwindle. The cryosphere, these areas of ice permanently frozen, they also play a vital role in regulating patterns in the atmosphere that could lead to extreme rainfall, flash floods, and eventually also lakes bursting out. And so remember Pakistan's devastating floods.
Last year before that.
Last year, exactly. We know that this was, monsoon season supercharged by climate change, but there's also growing evidence. There is evidence of another culprit, and that is melting glaciers. Pakistan is home to more than 7,000 of them, and as they melt faster, they add more water into rivers already swollen by more rainfall, Delano. So this is all a very kind of interconnected picture of whatever happens in the polar regions and in higher altitudes will have major consequences.
Valérie, thank you very much for that. Valérie there with some not so bright news for the future. Thank you for that.